Hello, welcome again to Sport Unlocked for the second time this week with myself, Rob Harris, Tarek Pandya from the New York Times and Martin Ziegler from the Times, in a week that's seen yet more Manchester United news with the ongoing process to sell the club or not to sell the club by the Glazers. It's been a bit confusing all around, hasn't it, at times?
Well, it seems like we've been in this position for weeks now, hasn't it? And then, bids in, deadline, and then nothing happens. And then I think somebody emerged out of the shadows, Thomas Ziliakos, a Finnish entrepreneur, who was I don't know how seriously we need to take him, because apparently he only found out a week ago that Manchester United was up for sale, and then if he's not successful, he's going to buy Liverpool instead. Should we take this seriously, guys?
Very hard to take much of this seriously, Martin. And the interesting thing with I won't mangle his surname. The chap you mentioned, because I'd not heard of him before, but we have heard of him now because he's bidding for the most famous club in the world. So that's one thing. The thing that I found interesting, his press release had his own contact details on it, and something I found quite interesting. Like normally, when something as big as Manchester United is up for sale, the actors involved tend to be quite big businessmen. But it's nice for Thomas to provide all of his own contact details should anyone want further information.
It's probably quite surprising given how he's such an entrepreneur. You think he'd be pretty busy. You could get inundated with a lot of media requests. How would he handle those alongside his business operations?
It's another one of the quandaries related to the Manchester United takeover, which none of this, very little of this has been kind of on the record as well, hasn't it? You've got these two, Jassim the Qatari and Jim Ratcliffe, the British businessman, who very openly, very publicly have bid for Manchester United, and there's been various briefings around this. The other kind of known quantity in this is Elliott, the venture capital firm that has said it would finance another bid. And then there's been reports that up to as many as 8 other bidders are out there, but we don't know who they are. Some of this just feels like a lot of hype to suggest there's like an imminent deal about to happen. But I don't know about you two, but to me it just seems it's a lot of noise as an estate agent might want to make to try and sell a house.
There was in the middle of this week, there was a sort of deadline, wasn't there? And then sort of news came out, or was reported, that the Qataris and Ineos had put in new bids, and then the group selling Manchester United, the bank, Raiden Bank, said that they hadn't. It's all seems a bit confusing, Robbie. I think you were reporting on it. What was your take?
I was actually at the Football Blacklist Awards as this was all unfolding, and it was approaching that sort of nominal deadline for the next round of bids, and it was Sheikh Jassim's side that pushed out the news that the bid was in, but then they had to sort of roll it back. I never had from the Ineos side the fact there was a second bid in. We'd heard during the day that it was due, but then we discovered that there was this extension of the deadline. The question is, which version of the account do you take? Certainly from Sheikh Jassim's side, it was suggested that they discovered the extension as they were submitting the bid, so they used that extra time. From the United banking side, there was the sense that actually the request had come in the previous day from the Sheikh Jassim side to actually have more time to sort of put that bid together. Then we're told that actually Jim Ratcliffe's side asked for an extension as well. So I suppose many things come into play here. We're sometimes led to believe that actually the Qataris might just chuck a huge number at it and they'll buy United, and why it's taking so long to sort of put this number together, why they can't price up the bid. Had obviously been round the ground and Carrington last week to sort of inspect the finances more. How long does it take to put a bid on the table? Or they're trying to sort of find out somehow that they're not overpaying compared to what else is on the table.
It's clearly, like, if you ask people, sensible balance sheet kind of mathematics would suggest the numbers that Glazers are talking about, it's not worth that unless someone is willing to buy a vanity club, a vanity asset for this crazy number. So the people who don't want to overpay maybe won't get the club because the Glazers aren't desperate to sell, which brings me to the second point I wanted to make on this, is all these deadlines are are kind of created, they're artificial to kind of create an urgency over something that doesn't require urgency in the same sense that Chelsea did. If you look at it, Rain was the bank that handled the Chelsea sale, got that enormous £2.5 billion number for Chelsea, and it did this kind of look. We're running out of time. You've got to get your bids in, or you'll lose, or the club is going to go to the wall. But Manchester United doesn't face any of these constraints. The Glazers don't. So a lot of this is artifice. So these deadlines, that it doesn't really matter. If you missed 9 p.m. and you're going to throw 5 billion at it at 9:05, he's not going to say sorry, Sheikh or your gymnast, you're 5 minutes late. I can't accept your money. And I think a lot of this is being played up in the media as well. It's part of the drama and theatre of it.
And of course, Manchester United are a club that generate huge hits online with big interest. So actually, there is a desire for actually a constant flow of news as well to be able to sort of sustain that interest.
International week as well, guys.
Well, I was going to say, let's hope welcome to all our new Manchester United supporters who are listening in for the first time.
And of course, the fans who want to seize on every bit of news, they're desperate to find out what happens with that takeover, and it sort of generates new lines of interest, which is why perhaps it's too good not to report on the Finnish guy announcing his own bidding interest, even though you sort of question his company, which seemed to have a market capitalization of sort of 400 odd million when I looked as well. And you sort of question, well, how did he only seemingly discover in the last week that Manchester United was for sale, when it's been one of the biggest business stories of recent months, even though the valuation is sort of lower than, some of the bigger deals that can be done in the corporate sector.
He's been very busy, maybe, and now he's busier. Now he's doing his own PR. But I just want to take this opportunity, seeing as we're all a lot of attention on this. I was going to buy a meal deal from Sainsbury's, but I'm going to save that £5 and I'm going to use that to launch my own bid for Manchester United. If there are any billionaires out there who want to join my bid, welcome. I think we can take these guys
You're interested
on.
in getting a meal deal for £5, get your lunch for £5, but you'll put up some of it, but it'd be good if some other fans could stump up the rest of the money for your lunch.
Absolutely. I'm putting my £5 is going towards Manchester United. I'll be the principal owner. With the billionaires, if they want to join me, feel free.
Would you accept a minority shareholding, Tarek?
Listen, everything's up for debate. Just get in touch. We can discuss it all, and we'll put a package together, Martin.
I'm actually surprised more names haven't come into the frame here, and people haven't sort of announced their interest or dangled it, at least to boost their Google hits. Perhaps some people with lower profiles.
There was the guy. This reminds me of the Chelsea deal, doesn't it? There were so many people who came out of the woodwork. They had no chance of buying Chelsea, but they got this huge amount of publicity, didn't they? And I think that's part of this circus around big Premier League teams, perhaps.
Yeah, we've seen it. I think there's a businessman, American businessman, said he wanted to buy Everton. I mean, there were sort of court judgments falling out all over the place in the USA regarding his company. He didn't have the wherewithal to do that, for sure. I think you're right. A lot of this is people saying get me into the headlines for one reason or another. And sorry you've gone without lunch today, Tarek, but it's an exciting offer.
It's an exciting future as well. Roll up.
Yeah, well, one club that I'd probably prefer to be out of the headlines is Barcelona, which is now being hit by a UEFA investigation into this ongoing scandal over payments to the company behind a refereeing official within the Spanish Federation. So where is this case heading? Why do you think UEFA have launched this case? What action can they ultimately take? Martin, you said could lead to a Champions League ban.
Yeah, so they do have this power, UEFA, that to intervene on any sort of match fixing. So it doesn't have to be in a UEFA competition.
Even though there's no allegation of match fixing at this point and Barcelona deny wrongdoing.
No, but I mean, I suppose if you're being investigated, by the Spanish prosecutors for corruption because you're paying €7 million to a senior refereeing figure, then it's. I think it's a fair assumption that these are allegations which could be looked into. So, which is why they've launched this disciplinary investigation. They did it before, about 10 years ago, with Fenerbahce from Turkey. They were involved in a match fixing scandal in Turkey, domestic football.
We didn't hear much from fans about this case, did we?
Well, yes, we were absolutely inundated on social media and emails with like thousands of Turkish supporters, Trabzonspor supporters, and they were furious with UEFA about this, weren't they? I can't remember why they were so angry about Fenerbahce being banned. Should they have been banned for longer, or I can't remember. I can't even remember what the issue was.
I did have to set up a lot of filters on my emails to stop the spam. I think some of various governing bodies as well, including Gianni Infantino, when he was at UEFA, was getting bombarded with messages as well.
I feel for Trabzonspor as well. While Fenerbahce got their UEFA ban, the Turkish Football Association didn't really take any action. So Trabzonspor, who would have won the league that year in place of Fenerbahce, didn't get the title. And they finally won the league 11 years later last season. So it was a long wait for them. I think there was another team as well called Skenderbau from Albania as well. They were pinged for match fixing and then kicked out of UEFA competitions. Of course, Barcelona haven't been found guilty of any of this, as Rob said, and they've really sort of taken this in the Laporta spirit of this, suggesting that everyone is in for them as usual, and this is the timing of this is to undermine Barcelona, kind of conveniently forgetting the fact that someone did pay this referee €7 million over that period of time, and for what we still don't know. It is another scandal involving Barcelona, another reputational hit for Barcelona as well, isn't it?
And how long will it take to come to a conclusion? Could we get a UEFA case before next season? Barcelona heading towards the La Liga title and obviously into the Champions League next season.
I suppose I think UEFA will have to wait and see what happens with this Spanish court case, whether it actually goes to court. So I think it probably won't be before next season, because I just think that these things drag on a bit.
Well, it's an ongoing case, and at the same time, Barcelona are still behind the push for a Super League. Are they behind the A22 company? Well, not officially, but it certainly seems so. And the A22 chief executive, Bernd Reichart, is on the charm offensive again. This is the company supposedly trying to push new plans for a Super League after the other collapsed 2 years ago. And he's been sort of speaking in Scotland, hasn't he? Maybe trying to appeal to that market and try to talk up why actually Rangers and Celtic would benefit from it, where really, is there any evidence the Super League plans would actually level the playing field and there wouldn't be the hierarchy still from the elite?
Well, I suppose they're in a position now where they having like tried to be the creme de la creme, and the top elite, and they're going to be in it forever, and that failed. The only thing they can do now is try and tempt clubs who were originally excluded from this to like appeal to them. Oh, you're going to be part of it after all. That's the only avenue they've got left. So yeah, I think there's been a bit of that happening. Still for me, the big problem, the insurmountable problem for a Super League is doing it without the Premier League clubs.
Yeah.
And I don't think you can.
Yeah, agree. And well, this is this new plan as well, this 60 to 80 club 3-division plan, and it will allow teams in small media markets like Scotland, like the Netherlands, like Portugal to be part of a bigger thing, and then those giant teams from their leagues, so Rangers and Celtic, or Benfica and Porto and Sporting, or Ajax, PSV, etc., can be in this pyramid. But again, I go back to who's A22 and who are they to design this stuff? It's just a group of people having an idea. Ziggs, you and Rob could, meet up at a pub and have another idea and then present that and then hopefully get the same media coverage.
Well, it's where we as the media have a sort of sense of a need to highlight the plausibility of the success of a plan and actually what prospect there is of it ever coming into play. It's obviously great to do these interviews with figures at the heart of the game, but sometimes the way they're presented perhaps can give the impression that something has the likelihood of succeeding when there are many hurdles along the way.
Yeah, I think it's probably, everyone accepts that Real Madrid are behind A22 and probably Juventus and Barcelona as well. So I suppose that they have some legitimacy in that they are sort of backed by them, even if they don't admit it. Otherwise, they are just any old company.
Well, two of those three clubs, Ziggs, they're in real trouble, aren't they? So you've got Juventus under this 15-point deduction in the criminal investigation, and Barcelona now, criminal investigation, and whatever's happening with their finances. It doesn't seem like the steadiest ground to be building your kind of assault on the European football model off of, is it?
Well, maybe it's desperate flailing attempts to sort of get out of trouble, maybe.
Well, some of our familiar themes there picked up on Super League, Manchester United, Barcelona in the world of football news off the pitch this week. But one of the big moments of the week in sports news came on Thursday with the outcome of 3 days of meetings by the World Athletics Council. And then we heard from Seb Coe. What was expected was the ban on Russians, which we can get into as well. But unexpected was a complete ban on transgender women who've been through male puberty competing in female events. A pretty strong position there from Seb Coe, the president of World Athletics.
The majority of those consulted stated that transgender athletes should not be competing in the female category. Many believe there is insufficient evidence that trans women do not retain advantage over biological women, and more evidence than any physical advantages have been ameliorated before they are willing to consider an option for inclusion into the female category. Unlike DSD athletes, there are no transgender athletes competing in international competition in athletics, and no observations therefore exist from the front line, in our case the field of play, across the different disciplines that are specific to our sport, i.e. endurance running, sprints, throws, jumps, and road events. Where the science is insufficient to justify maintaining testosterone suppression for transgender athletes, the Council agreed it must be guided by our overarching principle, which is to protect the female category. We cannot, in all conscience, leave our transgender regulations as they were at 5 nanomoles per litre for at least 1 year, when we were unsure about the impact of doing so across all our disciplines. So we need to know more, and we need to know more now. The Council has agreed to exclude male to female transgender athletes who have been through male puberty from female world ranking competitions from March the 31st this year. However, in order to do further research into our transgender eligibility guidelines, we will be establishing a working group whose remit will be to consult specifically with transgender athletes to seek views on competing in athletics, to review and maybe commission additional research where there is currently limited research.
He played it played quite cleverly, I think, looking at it now. So it sort of emerged in January that this sort of preferred option that was going to be put to World Athletics Council was halving the maximum testosterone level from 5 nanomoles per litre to 2.5. And it was suggested that was going to be for both transgender women in female competition and DSD athletes like Caster Semenya, who have differences of sexual development. So that was the sort of how the news emerged in January. But from what I understand, this was then sort of under the radar, changed so that they would split off DSD athletes and transgender women and make them different. And that's what happened. And I think quite cleverly, they've now had this position where transgender women are excluded from female competition, but DSD athletes, they can still compete, but with lower testosterone.
We kind of talked about this a lot, haven't we, this subject? And this is kind of the most defined prohibition from any of the governing bodies, it seems like, here from Seb Coe and World Athletics. And we also said there was never going to be a solution that makes everyone happy here. And here that you will have losers here. So transgender women cannot compete. But in terms of the fairness element that they were trying to get to, this has been celebrated, I think, quite broadly, hasn't it? Particularly for female athletes, women athletes, who've been really concerned about what this outcome will be. Were you surprised?
Well, it wasn't a decision we were expecting. It hadn't been indicated in advance. We had that other preferred option with lowering testosterone levels. And the first we knew was when Seb Coe announced it at the press conference. We heard from him a bit earlier. I got to ask him some questions, and here's the response when I asked if they'd considered having an open category.
That was part of the consultation. Various conversations came back, various overtures. But we think at this moment we have reached the right, we've got the right approach, and that's where we are.
There are athletes now who feel excluded and discriminated against. What is your message to them as they feel this pain, perhaps?
The decision that the council made is a primarily principled-based decision, and that is the overarching need to protect the female category. This is what our sport is here to do, and I think the council has done that today.
Ultimately, he went on the side of competition fairness and ensuring there potentially isn't a distortion of competition, even though it's only a few rare cases we hear of where we have had a trans woman suddenly gain prominence in a women's category where they hadn't been as dominant competing previously. And Seb Coe himself did actually say this doesn't seem to directly affect anyone at the moment. There aren't trans women who are suddenly going to be excluded from international competitions.
They haven't been faced the same things, for example, like swimming and cycling, where there have been some quite high-profile cases at the very elite level. That doesn't mean you shouldn't bring in, rules now, because there's no point waiting for something to happen, is there, and then sort of responding. I think it's the right move to actually put a policy in place, so you're prepared. And they're going to have a working group to look at it over the next year. I can understand people, campaigners thinking that this is World Athletics taking a sledgehammer to crack a nut. But I think it's the right move. And it'll be interesting now to see what rowing does, what cycling does, especially cycling, actually, because they got big issues there.
Brings to mind one of the things they said, until more studies are done. And isn't that part of the problem? You reported on this a few weeks ago. We talked about it, that big IOC study that kind of fell apart because there isn't enough science, enough candidates to study. So how are they going to get to the science? Is there anything in place at the moment?
Well, there are some cases, and there's a quite an interesting case by researchers in Sweden, which does find that sort of even after transitioning, after several years after transitioning, the sort of strength and lung capacity remain higher for transgender women than for women, or similar age and size. So I think there is some, but as you say, that because the pool of people to study is so small at the moment, it's very difficult.
Could you just remind us what happened with the IOC case, Ziggs?
So the IOC, they have, their recommendation is that you should have reduced testosterone of 5 nmol per litre. So that's what has been followed by cycling and rowing so far. Obviously, swimming was the big one that made the first move to prohibit transgender women taking part in female competition. It does seem that that's the way it's going to go, but I mean, it's as we also saw with World Athletics, it's not the first time that IOC have been out of kilter with athletics, is it?
And Russia?
Yes, the IOC have actually been welcoming of Russians potentially competing as neutrals at the Paris Olympics, but this is opposed by World Athletics, who imposed a blanket ban on Russians from competing in their events. This came at a meeting where they did lift the 7-year ban on the Russian Federation for the doping scheme that had been in operation. So Russia does remain banned, but they are interlinked because the doping ban was about state corruption, how they corrupted sport, how the Russians covered up the doping scheme, how then they covered up the cover-up as well. And that was an indication of actually how Russia acts on the world stage, how it couldn't be trusted.
Yeah, I mean, the World Athletics point out, what has actually changed with Russia and Ukraine. that would make them lift their ban. Nothing. If anything, things have got worse. So absolutely, you can understand why they've kept it, and you can't really understand why the IOC is wanting to change it, having initially recommended a blanket ban. Now it wants to change it. I mean, if you were cynical, you think it's because the Paris Olympics are coming up and they don't want to exclude any country, even if it's competing as neutrals.
Yeah. While we were in Kigali for the FIFA Congress, I got the sense, I think we both did, Martin, that the animus and opposition to Russia isn't as strong in other parts of the world outside of Europe and, say, I don't know, Western countries. We're going to see Russia play its first football match away from home, and that's going to be in Iran, which is part of the Asian Football Confederation. And there's been talk of Russia perhaps even moving to the AFC, the Asian Football Confederation, for World Cup qualifiers and away from UEFA and having their teams play in competitions there. So that landscape could be moving as well.
It probably reflects, of course, how the global south is less directly involved in criticising Russia over this conflict and how much it interlinks to, as we mark the 20th anniversary of the invasion of Iraq by the British and American-led group without UN approval, heavily debated, of course, over the last week, whether it was the right or wrong move to remove Saddam Hussein. But they do point to that war quite often, certain countries, when trying to say why they're not criticising Russia, don't they?
Yeah. And I think we've seen that. It's a good point this week, in particular, with that anniversary in mind. There are large parts of the world that aren't as exorcised about what Russia is doing and are happy to have cordial relationships. And then you've got parts of the world that are, in a sense, almost non-aligned and kind of prospering, thanks to thinking about those Gulf countries, the UAE in particular, which seems to be hosting a lot of Russian millionaires and billionaires, and also dealing on both sides of this situation. And that, again, looking at football, the AFC, the Asian Football Confederation, doesn't seem to be particularly opposed to the potential of Russia coming, providing that one of their places for the World Cup isn't lost. That might be what will maybe tip the balance, not these sort of larger geopolitical tectonic plates that you were discussing there, Rob.
One other interesting side issue from this is Seb Coe announced he's going to seek his third and last 4-year term as World Athletics president in August. It'll be interesting to see what happens after that, because Thomas Bach is due to stand down from the IOC in 2025. Coe has been, I think he said before, he's not ruled out standing for the IOC presidency. Obviously, Bach is going to be very unhappy with him for sort of spoiling his Paris plans over the Russians competing as neutrals. So fascinating to see what happens. In 2025, if Coe decides he wants to run, I guess he'd have to become a vice president or something like that of World Athletics and run for the big one. But I'm sure Thomas Bach would be manoeuvring his forces to try and stop him.
Well, it's funny, in the beginning, when Bach was in the early stage of his presidency, Coe wasn't even a member of the IOC, was he?
No, it was actually partly due to his private business, wasn't it? Actually, Thomas Bach said it as much when I asked him in 2019 while we were at the World Athletics Championships in Qatar. He flagged up there were certain matters to resolve, weren't there, still?
Perhaps no love lost then between the two.
We've had so little opportunity to ask Thomas Bach anything over the last year. Let's hope we do now get an opportunity and ask him, what has changed? What has changed in terms of the IOC in the last year, which means that now Russians can compete, as far as you're concerned?
From a media point of view, the IOC seem to still be operating as though we're in the midst of a pandemic, don't they? The doors seem to be locked to their headquarters, the media opportunities, the few that there are, they still seem to be on Zoom only. I wonder why.
Interesting one, particularly for any PR practitioners listening, in terms of where they're going with that Zoom model still, whether they're going for a hybrid model where you can be there in person, and whether Zoom press conferences allow more of us to participate from around the world, whether people are far away from Switzerland or in the IAAF World Athletics case from Monaco can participate in our SEBCO, or whether it's actually better in terms of the concerns on climate change that not unnecessary travel, but certainly where we do benefit from being there is actually being face-to-face and having conversations, and you aren't at the behest of a mute button.
Well, yeah, and you might be able to follow up.
That's for sure.
The IC holding a series of meetings next week. That about brings an end to this week's episode of Sport Unlocked. As ever, you can hit subscribe and we land in your feed automatically. For now, thank you for listening.